Hello everyone, welcome to Dinesh SQL. My name is Dinesh Priyankara, Data Platform MVP and Business Intelligence Architect. Let's talk about Azure Synapse. A couple of months back, Microsoft released Azure Synapse, calling this as an integrated analytics service, which can be used for implementing data warehouse solutions and big data analytics services or big data analytics solutions. So let's try to understand what is Azure Synapse, what sort of components it has, and how we can use these components, services, tools for implementing our various type of data related solutions. You can see I have named this video as Azure Synapse Analytics Part 1 because I'm planning to create multiple short videos on Azure Synapse covering various areas related to Azure Synapse and showing you the way of using these services for implementing your data warehouse solution, your data science solution, or your big data analytics solution. In order to understand Azure Synapse, it is always better to talk about the way we have been processing data. We had the various terms for our old-fashioned data processing solutions, like we were calling them as data warehouse solution or lab solution, and then we started calling these as big data solutions. Nowadays, some can call their data solution as data science solutions. So we have various terms, and we have been implementing these solutions in various ways. So let's try to understand the traditional way we have been processing data, and then let's see how we convert the whole thing into the modern way, implementing modernized data solutions, specifically in cloud. And let's discuss what sort of Microsoft services or what sort of Azure services we use for implementing various parts of our data solution. And at the end, let's see how we can use Azure Synapse for implementing the same. Let's start with sources. So when we talk about data processing, we have multiple sources. We have our standard OLTP databases. We have cloud databases, CSV file, Excel files. Generally, we can consider these as structured data. And then we have some unstructured data too. You can see I have grayed out that icon. So let me talk about it later. Consider this is the traditional way of implementing your data processing solution or data related solution. So we'll consider only structured data. So the ultimate goal of implementing a solution like this is catering requirements coming from the audience. So when you talk about the audience, we have three types: information consumer, power users, and basic users. If I talk about these types little bit, information consumers are all about the users who consume what IT has given. So they will be just going through reports that have been created by IT, applications that have been created by IT. They don't do any changes for those data sets, reports. There won't be much interaction. So that category is called as information consumers. Let me talk about basic users. So basic users, yes, they just like information consumers, they use what IT has created. But in addition to that, they create their own analytical environment. They create their own reports. They create their own dashboards. They perform their own experiments. But main thing we have to remember is when it comes to basic user, he's doing all of these things without writing codes. So he'll be using graphical interfaces, wizard, for creating their own models, experiments, reports, dashboard without writing codes. You see many basic users in organization, users who use Excel, Power BI, Tableau, ClickSense. They're the one who create their own models and then create reports and dashboards. So that's basic users. Then we have power users. So power users are users who do not depend on IT. Yes, they can consume things that have been given by IT, but they prefer to access data directly from sources. Or they might access some repositories that have been created by IT, which contain some raw data. The reason is they get raw data into their environment and they use their own platform, tools, mechanism for working with data, writing codes, not just based on GUIs. They will be writing codes for performing various type of experiments. Right, so these are the types we have. So in order to satisfy the requirements coming from these three types, we create relational data warehouse, generally based on either Kimball's or Inman concept. So if you say that you have created your relational data warehouse based on Kimball's concept, you will be seeing dimensions and facts. So how you are going to load your relational data warehouse based on traditional mechanism called ETL, extract, transform, loading. In addition to that, based on the audience types you have, if you have power users, in order to cater their requirements, you might create another repository. Let's say it's a file share, or it's just a folder that contains some data set as CSV files. So we create that as well as a part of our traditional data warehousing. In addition to relational data warehouse, we used to create cubes. Nowadays we call these cubes as enterprise models. You can use various components for creating this enterprise model. This is actually a multidimensional database, which is an optimized data structure for performing analytics. So when we have all of these things, IT can create reports, and information consumers can consume these reports. Other users can get data based on their requirements. So you can see power user can connect with the file share or the location or the repository that have been created for storing raw data, or they can get data from relational data warehouse as well. So business users, they can connect with relational data warehouse or the model that have been created for creating their own models, creating their own data repositories, and then perform their own experiments, create their own reports and dashboards. So this is how we have been implementing traditional data warehouses, or in other terms, or you can say that corporate data warehouse solutions. So you know that we did not consider unstructured or semi-structured data, but after a certain time period, we had to consider semi-structured and unstructured data, because all these users wanted to make sure that they analyze both structured and unstructured data for doing various type of analysis. So we have to take this into our data warehouse. But initially we didn't have a proper database management system which can be used for processing semi-structured and unstructured data efficiently. But fortunately, we had something called Hadoop. This is how we started using Hadoop. So as a part of the Hadoop platform, we had various type of sub projects like HBase, Spark, Hive. So we use these sub projects for getting data from sources and then process using various clusters, and then we can move certain data sets to relational data warehouse, making it as structured data set. So once this part is done, power users can directly access this environment in order to get his data set process based on his own logic and continue with his experiments. So this is how we enhance traditional and corporate data warehousing. Still, this is on-prem. This is what happened when we move from on-prem to cloud. See this. So the highlighted area is the cloud, and we started moving everything possible to the cloud environment. So we started performing ETL operation with the cloud, not only ETL, even ELT, where you perform big data processing. And then we started moving data warehouses to cloud. We started creating models in cloud. In addition to that, we started maintaining a new repository, which is called as data lake. So audience types are same. We didn't see any change on that. Still the requirement is same. So we had to, we must make sure that we satisfy requirements coming from all these types. So if you think about Microsoft Azure platform, how we can implement this type of solution using Microsoft Azure Services. For ETL, we can use Data Factory, or you can use SSIS package. Let's say you have already created SSIS packages as a part of your on-prem data warehouse solution. So you can take them and then integrate with your Data Factory and continue with the same set of packages. In order to implement the platform for processing semi-structured and unstructured data, Azure gives us something called HDInsight, which has almost all important Hadoop components like Spark, Hive, and everything is available. So you can use HDInsight for processing semi-structured and unstructured data. You can use either Azure SQL Database or Azure SQL Data Warehouse for implementing your data warehouse in the cloud. If your data warehouse is not that big, you can still implement your data warehouse with Azure SQL Database, because there are various type of models available, various type of purchasing models available. So you can pick one of these models and implement your data warehouse. But if your data warehouse is very large, if it needs a distributed processing and distributed storage, then you can go for Azure SQL Data Warehouse. In addition to that, analysis service is available in Azure, so you can create your models in the cloud. In terms of reporting, still you don't have reporting service in Azure, but most of the reporting requirements can be addressed with Power BI. So this is how we have implemented our data warehouse solution, or in other term, big data solution in Azure. Later, we started using, or I'm not going to say we started or we replaced the Hadoop environment with this, but we started using something called Databricks. So we have the standard Databricks and Azure Databricks. So we started using Azure Databricks for handling all data processing related to semi-structured and unstructured data sets. So only that part got changed. And if I just highlight certain data warehouse solutions I have created for last 1 or 2 years, this was the standard architecture. Of course, client to client, it is getting changed. But with most of the data warehouse solution or the big data solutions, I use Data Factory, I use Data Lake Gen 1 and Gen 2. I use SQL Database for certain data warehouses. I use Azure SQL Data Warehouse for some data warehouses. But when it's come to data processing, I heavily use Azure Databricks. Okay, right. So we still use this architecture. We still use these Azure services for implementing our data solutions. Then why Microsoft released something called Azure Synapse? In order to understand that, let me share some of the issues I experienced with this type of architecture, or when I was implementing some data solutions for some of my clients. What sort of issues I experienced. Now, we know that all these components or the services, data lake, data warehouse, data factory, Azure Databricks, everything has to be managed, maintained separately. Now, for example, when you handle security, you need to handle security with each and every service you have. When there's integration, you need to configure one component and you need to make sure that other component can work with the first one. So likewise, there are a lot of things you need to do in order to make sure that integration works fine, security works fine, and maintenance can be done easily. So what if Microsoft can give us a single environment which has all of these things? That's where you see Azure Synapse Analytics, or you can say Azure Synapse. Even though I said that Azure Synapse has everything we discussed, just remember some of the components are not fully available and some components are still not available. For example, if you think about the modeling part, which has to be implemented with Azure Analysis Services, it is still not available as part of Synapse. So Synapse is basically a single environment you can consider as a workspace, which has components for implementing your modern data solution. If you have a requirement for data warehouse solution, you can use Azure Synapse. If you have a requirement for a big data solution, you can use Azure Synapse. If you have a requirement for machine learning or data science solution, you can use Azure Synapse. Basically, it is a combination of everything you have used for implementing your data solution. Let me show you some of the definitions I have taken from the web. So the first one, it basically says Azure Synapse is an integrated analytics service that accelerates time to insight from all data at any scale across data warehouses and big data analytics systems. So you're not going to have two separate environments, one for data warehousing, one for big data analytics. You have one environment, you'll be managing the whole thing as a single environment, and you will see data warehouse components with it. You will see big data components with it. If you just see the second definition I have added, it says Azure Synapse is Azure Data Warehouse Evolve. So if you think about modern data warehousing, earlier, yes, we were stuck into a structured data set. That's why we saw dimensions and facts. we know that in order to do proper analytics, facts and dimensions are not enough. We need to make sure that we have everything we need. We need to make sure that data that represent the entire company exists. Not only that, we have to make sure that we can access external data as well. So that's the evolution of data warehousing. So Azure Synapse is basically a platform for implementing modern data warehouse solutions. Okay, let's talk about some components available with Azure Synapse. So we have something called Synapse SQL. This is where you see the SQL part of Azure Synapse. So you have two things, SQL Pool and SQL On Demand. So SQL Pool or the SQL Pool is the one you have seen as Azure SQL Data Warehouse. So when you want to have your relational data warehouse in a distributed manner, just like the way you have been configuring Azure SQL Data Warehouse, you need to add it as a SQL Pool. Okay, so that's your Azure SQL Data Warehouse. In addition to that, you have something called SQL On Demand. So SQL On Demand is all about execute your TSQL statements against some sort of data set without provisioning a database using dedicated resources. Now, you know that when you create a Azure SQL database, it uses dedicated resource set. But in this case, it allows you to create a database without allocating resources. But when you execute the code, it will take required resources from the pool, use it for processing, and once the process is done, the resources will be released back to the pool. So we call this as serverless architecture or the serverless databases. So you can simply use serverless databases for processing your data. In addition to that, you can create your own databases using dedicated resource models. So when you open the environment, if you have created dedicated databases, yes, you are going to see it. But if you have serverless databases, you're not going to see your permanent tables with it. Under this SQL category, you will be seeing some capabilities for streaming and machine learning. You know that machine learning is anyway available with SQL 2019 or Azure SQL Database. You can do experiments, create models, publish it, and then you can consume these models within SQL environment. So those facilities are available with Azure Synapse as well. Next component is Spark. So you know that we heavily use Spark components for processing data, specifically semi-structured and unstructured. So if you remember the architecture we discussed, we initially use Hadoop environment, then we moved the whole thing into Azure Databricks. So even within the Azure Databricks, we use Spark. Okay, that's the best engine for processing semi-structured and unstructured data. Now, you don't need to go into a different environment for processing semi-structured and unstructured data when it comes to Azure Synapse. It is available as an integrated component. So everything you have been doing with Azure Databricks can be done with the Azure Synapse Sparks component. You have Synapse pipelines. So remember, for implementing ETL solution, we discuss Azure Data Factory. That's what we generally use for implementing ETL solution in cloud data solutions. You don't need to go for Data Factory and create your pipelines. This facility is available within Azure Synapse framework or the Workspace. We have a Studio as well. Now, if you have used Azure Machine Learning Service, if you have used Azure Data Factory, you know that Azure has some studio or development environment for doing various things. So Azure Synapse has something similar. We call this as Synapse Studio. So you can open the studio and manage everything you have created under Azure Synapse. Not only that, you can codes, for example, you can create a TSQL file and write codes against your databases, or you can create a notebook and write codes against your relational database or your semi-structured and unstructured data that's stored in your data lake. So when it comes to notebook, just like Azure Databricks notebooks, you can use your preferred language. So we used to code with Python, Scala, R, but in this environment, you have .NET as well. So these are some of the components we see in Azure Synapse. I'm sure that there will be more, but one thing you remember is most of these components are still preview, which mean you should not use all of these things for implementing thing in production. Okay, but if you're planning a data solution, if you're planning to implement a data warehouse solution or big data solution or data science solution, you can consider Azure Synapse. I'm sure that we'll be seeing all these items as GA within next couple of months. Okay, so we talk about Azure Synapse, and let me show you how to create Azure Synapse Workspace and then create few databases and work with some structured data and unstructured data. Okay, so let's see how we can create an environment for our big data processing or data warehousing. So I have logged into my Azure portal, and let me look for Azure Synapse. Click on this and click on all services. I can search for Synapse. So when I search for Synapse, I get multiple items. I can see Azure Synapse Analytics Workspace Preview and Azure Synapse Analytics, formerly SQL Data Warehouse. So this is what we use for creating Azure SQL Data Warehouses. You can still continue, but let me click on this for seeing the new environment. Right, I don't have anything created. Let me click on Add. So my subscription is selected, and I'm going to create a new environment called, or new resource group called Demo. Right, and the workspace name, let me name this as SQL Azure Synapse Workspace. And let me select Southeast Asia. Right, data lake storage. So remember, when you create an environment, it needs a data lake storage. So it's going to be a Gen 2 data lake storage. If you have already created one, you can select it, and you can select one of the file systems exists in that Azure data lake storage and configure it as a part of this. Or else you can create a new one. So I'm going to create a new one. Let me click on create new, and let me name this as SQL Azure Synapse Workspace storage. That's going to be the storage. Let me click on OK, and I'm going to create a new file system as well. So let me just name this as main. So if you're going to use an existing one, it's always better to create a new file system. Okay, right. This is really important. Make sure you click on this. It says assign myself the storage blob data contributor role on the data lake storage Gen 2. So what happened is my account will be a member of storage blob data contributor role related to data lake storage Gen 2. So I'll be able to do what are the operation I prefer. Let me click on security and see this is where you set credential for your SQL server. You will see I'll open the Management Studio and show you the way of connecting with this. So username is SQL admin user. I'm going to set a very simple password. And done, and allow pipelines to access SQL Pool. So this will handle the security. Otherwise, you have to configure everything manually. Let me click on networking. No, we don't need to have anything related to virtual networks. This is really important. Allow connection from all IP addresses. If you have used SQL databases in Azure, you have to always register the IP address. So let's say, we allow everyone to connect with this environment for the moment. Right. That's all. Let me click on review and create. It validates all my input. If everything is okay, it will allow me to create it. Yes, all fine. So I'm going to click on create button. So it's creating my Synapse Analytics workspace. Okay, so the environment is created. So let's go into it and see what it has. So this is my workspace. I can see multiple buttons at the top. New SQL Pool. This is what we use for creating your SQL data warehouses. This is for creating Spark pools. And if you want to reset the SQL admin password, this is what we have to use. And you can see a button called Launch Synapse Studio. So that's the environment which can be used for managing all your resources in this workspace. Before I go into Synapse Studio, let's go through these URLs. So I can see Data Lake Gen 2 account. And in addition to that, I can see SQL endpoint and SQL on-demand endpoint. I have two SQL endpoints. So let me pick first one, which is SQL endpoint, and then connect to this using Management Studio. Let me go to the Management Studio. Let me paste the URL and SQL authentication, SQL admin user, and let me set the password. Let me say, remember my password. So let's see whether I can log in. Remember, we initially set this for all IP addresses. So because of that, I was able to connect with it without registering my IP address. So I can see databases node. If I expand, I don't see anything. Let's connect with the SQL on-demand one as well. Let me copy the URL. So this is the URL for SQL on-demand endpoint. Let me go back to the Management Studio. Connect. Okay, I have connected, but I don't see any databases with this. Let's do some experiment and see how these things are being used by Azure Synapse Workspace. Let me click on Launch Synapse Studio. So this opens this Synapse Studio, and this is the environment. Let me click on Accept on this and then close this. Okay, so we have certain things on the left pane. If I expand this, I can see Home. This is where I see certain items, and I can see a section for data. I don't have any databases. I can click on this and create databases. You can see Synapse SQL Database, or I can connect to external data sources. If I click on Develop and click on Plus, you can see I can create various SQL script, notebook, data flows, and Spark jobs. So this is the environment you basically use for writing codes for processing data, just like Azure Databricks. And Orchestrate is completely for implementing your pipelines. That is for creating Azure Data Factory pipelines. And monitoring section, you can use this for monitoring all your clusters, pipelines, and things like that. And if you go for manage, you can manage things centrally. So this is what you get from your workspace. You can manage your SQL pools. You can manage your Spark pools. You can manage link services you have created as a part of your data factory pipelines, triggers, integration runtimes you have added. So most of the things can be managed with this environment. You can see a new button. Remember, most of the items are still in preview. So because of that, certain buttons are not getting enabled for some reason. For example, if I try to create SQL pool using the Studio, I will experience some issues. So because of that, what I'm going to do is I'm going back to the previous tab, and then I'm going to click on New SQL Pool. If I click on that, I'll be getting an interface which can be used for creating my data warehouse. So let me just name this as DW, and I don't want all these DWs. Let me just stick into 100 just to save you money, but you can go up to whatever the number you like. If I go for additional settings, you can see you can get your data warehouse created based on backup, or you can use an existing one with a restore point. And this is the collation. That's all, nothing to be changed. Let me click on create and see how my data warehouse is getting created. So remember, this is not an on-demand database. This is your data warehouse. So let's see how it goes. Okay, it got created. I can click on go to resource, but let me go to my workspace by closing this. Okay, this is my workspace. And you can see under SQL Pool, you can see one data warehouse. And now if I go for my Studio and go to my data, let me refresh. I can see one database. If I expand it, I can see all these nodes, tables, external tables. So this is like normal data warehouse. Let me go to Management Studio and see whether I can see this. Let me refresh my standard endpoint. I can see my data warehouse. So this is getting added to my standard endpoint, not on-demand endpoint. I don't have anything with this. So I can simply click on new query window, and let's create a simple table. I'm going to say create table dbo.customers. Let's say this is a dimension. So I have ID, INT, and name of the customer, 100. Let me run it and see. All good. Insert into dbo.customer. Let me insert, customer and ID and name, values. Let me say 1 and Dinesh. Let me say whether I can insert it, and I'll copy this statement and insert the second record as well. Let me say this is Jack. Okay, so let me see how table has been created. You know, tables are in distributed manner, so you can see it is by default round robin. That's why you are seeing this icon. So this is a round robin distributed table. Let me go back to my Synapse Studio and see. Refresh. I can see one table. I can click on this and select new script, select 100 rows. I can access my records and see. I can write codes. I can do various experiments with this. In addition to that, if I click on this ellipsis button and see the menu item, I can see new notebook as well. So if I click on load to data frame, it needs a cluster. It's all about creating a data frame, something like pandas data frame, and get the data loaded into this environment. So before we talk about this, anyway, like if I click on this, it will give me the code. You can see it creates a notebook called notebook 1, and the Scala has been selected as the default language. You can see it uses spark.read SQL Analytics. Let me execute this and see whether it works. So it says no available Spark pools because we have not created. So let me close this and then close this notebook 1 and then go into my other tab and create the Spark pool. But before that, let's have a quick look on the storage. So this is my Azure Storage Explorer, the tool, the free tool which can be downloaded and installed. Let me expand this subscription. I can see the Data Lake Gen 2. With this, let me expand this. Let me expand blob containers. I should see my main. So I don't see any other thing. Let me quickly create a folder in this. I'm going to upload a very simple CDR file. Let me create a folder inside this. So remember, we are doing everything inside Synapse Analytics Workspace. Okay, so I create a folder called CDR. I'm going to upload a file. Okay, I'm uploading a file for this. Let's have a look on this later. Let me go back to my portal. Let me go to the first tab and I'm going to create a Spark tool now. Right, let me name this as Azure Synapse Workspace. So let me say 01. Okay, now it is good. Right, so node sizes, how many nodes you want and the size of the nodes. So I'm going to pick small nodes. Auto scale enable. I'm going to say, okay, I'm okay with 2 nodes initially and maximum 4. So if you are familiar with Azure Databricks, you have seen a similar setup. You can say, I want, this is my spec for nodes and I want to get my environment automatically scale out. That's this setting. So it will always have 3 nodes, but I'm allowing these guys to expand it up to 4 nodes. So I can see the approximate cost and let me go to additional setting and see. All good. But if I go back, you can see a message. So have a look on this note. So you can see assign the workspace MIS to storage blob contributor role on the storage account. So just make sure that you have set enough permission to your storage account. Okay, right. So let me click on review and create. All good. I'm going to create my Spark pool. All right, it is done. Now, when I go to my workspace, I can see under Spark pools, I can see 1 cluster. Okay, so if I go to this, I should see the same. If I go to manage, if I click on Apache Spark pools, I can see the cluster. Let me go back to my storage account and see whether anything has been changed. Let me refresh blob containers. Nothing. But when I go to my file system, I can see a folder which is called Synapse. It has been created. If I go into it, I can see multiple folders because this environment maintains various things. For example, if I create an external table, metadata has to be maintained. If I create a permanent table, things have to be maintained inside this storage. So that's why folders have been created. Let me go back to my Synapse Studio and let me click on data. Let me click on linked. I can see my storage. If I expand this, I can see, I should be able to see the content of my storage. I can see my file system and I can see folders. So let me go into CDR and I can see my file. Let me right click on this file and say new notebook, load to data frame. So let's see whether this works. Okay, it got executed. So I can simply access things in my data lake and then process it. So this is how we create processing logics. Just like Databricks, we'll be creating a notebook and then we'll be writing codes for getting data from my data lake Gen 2, do some processing, and then I can use the same notebook for loading the result to my dimension tables or fact tables in my Azure Synapse Analytics SQL pools. So you can see I can, just like normal notebooks, I can add additional code, add text, and I can change the language. So it is very similar to Jupyter Notebook. Since we created a Spark pool or the cluster and we executed certain codes, let's go to the Management Studio and see whether any new databases that have been added by this environment. Let me go to the Management Studio. I can see a database called default. So this is something that I've been added as a part of my cluster. If you have coded or if you have worked with something like Hadoop or specifically Hive, you know that when you open the Hive environment, it creates a default database. So just like that, it creates this database. If you create external table, things can be created inside this. Can I have my own on-demand databases? Yes, that is also possible. For example, I can go back to my studio and create my own database. Let me do it. Let me click on develop, and I can select this and say new SQL script. I can see my data warehouse, SQL on demand has been selected and master data has been selected. So I can simply say create database test. So let me execute this and see. All good. So let's go back to my Management Studio, or else I can go for data and workspace. Let me refresh this. I can see data warehouse, I can see test, and I can see default Spark database as well. So when we work with this environment, I can create my databases on demand without creating with dedicated resources, and I can drop them as I want. Can I access external data sources? Yes, let me take one of the codes given by Microsoft and show you the way of accessing external data sources. In order to show you that part, let me go to the home tab of my Synapse Studio. And with this, I can see certain links saying Knowledge Center. Let me click on it. And I can click on use samples immediately. Let me click on it. I can see multiple options: explore sample data with Spark, query data with SQL, create external table with SQL. You can click on these buttons and see what sort of samples it adds. But let me select this, create external table with SQL, select an existing pool. So I can see this pool, or else I can select my data warehouse. That is also possible. And then it says selected database is this. And let me click on use sample. So I can see a code automatically generated. You'll be using similar code for accessing your own storage as well. So this will get some data from some public storage. It will create a table called yellow trip extension. That's basically uses taxi data. And at the end, it will query 100 records. So this basically create an external table pointing to some other data source. So let's run it and see whether it works. So you can see we can simply get data from external data source, and I can query my table. Let's go to the Management Studio and see. Let me refresh tables and see. I'm not seeing anything. Let me expand external tables. I can see my table. Okay, so I can write queries against this. But remember, this is an external table. This table has no data. Okay, I did a very short demo because this is the first video related to Azure Synapse Analytics. I'll be creating multiple videos on this, addressing or covering individual components. And let's see how we can really use Synapse Analytics for our big data solutions or data warehouse solutions. But just to summarize what I did, Synapse Analytics is basically an environment which can be used for creating your big data solution or data warehouse solutions. If you have a requirement for creating a data warehouse with dimensions and facts, this environment can support you. If you have a requirement for creating the data warehouse with MPP architecture, this environment can support you. If you have semi-structured and unstructured data to be processed and then results to be sent to your data warehouse, results to be sent back to your data lake, this environment can be used. If you want to manage all your data repositories including processing clusters, you can use this environment. If you want to manage security for all your data repositories, this environment can support. So you can see it is going to be a one single environment which can be used for all our operations related to data related solutions or data related projects. Okay, so that's all I have for this video. Let's talk about more on Synapse Analytics later. Thanks for watching.